Hello and welcome to another late night talk. My guest this evening is science fiction, fantasy, and horror writer Ginger Smith. Welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, this is great. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So, as I always start with guests, I like to talk about their inspirations and where stuff came from. And look at all the stuff behind you. I can guess probably some of it already, but for those who are listening, because apparently some people listen to these videos and don't watch them, can you tell us about your origin story? What were you watching, listening to, reading, growing up as a kid that got you into kind of genre fiction?
Oh wow, what a great question. When I was a kid, I guess the first thing that introduced me to sci-fi fantasy was my dad would read The Hobbit to me at night when I was about 6 years old,
Mhm.
and he would stop at all the cliffhangers so that I'm hanging on for the rest of the story the next night. I would plead with him, please read the rest of it, and he wouldn't. So that was really my first introduction to fantasy, and I was a really early reader, so I got so frustrated with waiting for the next part of it. I said, "Can I read it?" And he gave it to. He's like, "Sure." And I know he was thinking this kid's not gonna know what she's reading, and I didn't. But that's how I got started. And growing up, we watched Star Trek, the original series. I have some early memories of watching that with my dad in reruns, in the 70s and early 80s.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to think what else. My dad was a big sci-fi reader, and so he had gigantic stacks of 70s, 60s and 70s like pulp sci-fi and
Mhm.
classic sci-fi just sitting around. And as a kid, I read it. I don't know how much I absorbed, as I got older and older, I think subconsciously I must have absorbed some of it. But as a young, 12 years old, I think I read Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks.
Mhm.
And I thought that was the bomb. I thought that was great. I loved it as a kid. It was very accessible for a
Yes.
younger age. Um, and of course I went back to Tolkien and read all those when I got older, but it really was Terry Brooks that kind of started me as a writer, because I read and this book's really old, so I guess spoiler alert, don't listen if
It's
you
fine.
haven't. Yeah, this is like really old. But I read the Offstones of Shannara, and when one of the characters turned into, like, she died, she gave her life
Yes.
and turned into a tree.
Mhm.
I was so upset. I cried. I was so angry. I could not believe that it would end that way because they should have a happy ending, is what I felt back then.
Mm.
And I said, I was so upset that I said, I'm going to write my own story. So I did. I did. So it was really anger at Terry Brooks. And I don't know if he ever listens to this or whatever, if he's still around. But thank you for Terry Brooks doing that. But it spurred me on, and I wrote like a 300-page book
Wow.
as a kid.
How old
It's
were you when you were
I
writing
was like
this?
12, 11 or 12. This is it.
You still got it.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's horrible. I will never, like, I'm not even holding up the camera because I don't want anybody to see it really quick.
Well,
But still got it. And it was like 300 pages long, like, and I'm sure it mimicked whatever story I was reading that week or
yeah.
whatever book I was reading. It's horrible, but somehow I held on to it all these years. So
But
but
kudos
yeah.
for you for doing it as a traveler, for not only writing a story, but doing like a 300-page story as a kid and finishing it. That's amazing. Most people are like, oh, I started to do it and then just give up. But when you're a kid, that's a long book.
Yeah, I've always had that kind of a like, I don't know. I don't expect anybody else to be like a perfectionist, but like me, I grab onto something and I'm gonna do it until it's like exactly how I like it.
Mm.
And I guess I just stuck with it. And all my parents' friends were like, "Oh, she's writing a book at such a young age," and I guess I like that attention. Um, but I wrote that, and then I, like, as a kid, I was in a young writers conference in the South Carolina Young Writers Conference, and
Mm.
that was cool. And I just always wanted to be a writer. And then I went to college, and kind of forgot about that for a while and did other
Mm.
things. And but I was always a huge, sci-fi fan. You can see I've got a gigantic sci-fi toy collection. My husband and I do. We have comics and
Mhm.
My favorite is my $6 Million Man collection. You can see some of them right
Nice.
there. Yeah. um, so I guess it's not just, it's not just writing books, it's a
Mm, hmm. I recognize the
lifestyle.
yellow lantern behind you, so well
Yeah,
done. Well done for having
we
the
have
yellow lantern, Sinistra's lantern, of course.
we have several Green Lanterns around this room, so but
Mm.
they're up high, they're hard to see, but yes.
So were you a DC fan, more of a Marvel, or are you just what? That's
Yeah, we have my husband's a huge DC fan. He's a huge DC fan. And throughout the years, like I started collecting comics, but I collect like the Gold Key comics.
right.
So like horror comics like Boris Karloff and um I'm trying to think Ripley's Believe It or Not, the
Mm.
Twilight Zone. I'm a huge Twilight Zone fan. And so that's kind of my area. Like I'm very familiar with the DC stuff and some of the Marvel stuff, but like that's my little niche. So we kind of together we have like a giant comic collection, of thousands and thousands.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of my origin story, I guess. My dad was a big influence on me, and um, and he kind of inspired me to love sci-fi, and so I kind of can't discount all those summers that I spent reading. And my aunt too, my aunt was had a big effect on me because she read horror novels, and so she would loan me
Ah.
horror novels as like a 12-year-old. I'd be reading Stephen King and F. Paul Wilson, which is kind of an old author, but some things that were popular in the 80s, like she had all that. And I really, love that too. And so I'm currently, working on something in the horror family, I guess, in
Mhm.
that genre right now.
Okay. So you go to college, and when do you start thinking about writing again? When do you start thinking about doing a novel?
Well, after college, I kind of flitted around a little bit and managed a bookstore, and then always, wanted to be a writer and just thought about it, and I was like, no. And then when the internet kind of got, going, I started writing fan fiction, and so I
Hmm.
wrote some
Yeah, me
Star
too.
Wars fanfic, Star Wars, and I kind of got into to doing that. And my husband's like, why are you writing fanfic? You need to write something original. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. Nah, nobody will ever, no one will ever be interested in something I would come up. And and he kept saying, you need to write a book. You need to write a book. Look at all these hits you're getting on your stories. People are coming back for more. You need to write something. And so I was like, okay, fine. I'll write a book for you. It's not going to get published, but I'll write you a book. And I said, I'll write. I really set out to write a book for him so he
Mhm.
would get off my back. And, I was like, okay, I'll try it. It's not going to work, but I'll try it. Because I'm not really the world's biggest optimist sometimes. I mean, I try to be like I
Mhm.
want to be, but then I'm like, no, that's not going to work. But it, and he read it and gave me feedback all along. And he's a big military historian, and he's into all that. That's kind of it's got to do with his job. Um, and then I said, I guess I'll try to submit this thing. So I got on the internet and just started finding out, what do you do to submit? What do you have to pull together? How do you get it out to, agents? And
Mhm.
and it went on from there. And if it wasn't for my husband Judd, I would not have I would not have taken this journey. So I dedicated my book to him. And he's really the person who got me off my butt and say, get out there and do this. You can do this. And
Mhm.
yeah.
So that book was The Rush's Edge, then, that you wrote for him.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. I wrote it for him. He likes a lot of action. So I was like, this book has to be full of action, but I love characterization and character development. And, so I like had to marry the two together. And so once I got it written, I submitted it to some agents and got turned down, because that's how that goes. And I saw that Angry Robot had an open submissions period, and I said, I'll just send it to them. What have I got to lose?
Nothing to lose.
Hey. And so I sent it to Angry Robot and I said, oh, I'm never going to hear back. But that whole summer I was like, man, it would be great. Like Angry Robot's so cool. They're just on the cutting edge of what's new and fresh. And like, I would love to be published by them, but that's never gonna happen. And then I was at school and I got an email that said, hey, we would like to talk to you about your book, The Rush's Edge. And I was like, oh my God. And the funny thing is, at the same time, I got another offer from like an e-publisher, like that only published ebooks, and of course, that came first, and then Angry Robot was like a day later. And I thought, oh my God, I have two people that want this book. And of course, Angry Robot was the way to go. But I think it was Chris Panettiere and I both got chosen from the same open submission period. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've spoken to Chris before. I met him when he came over to the UK last year.
Yes.
We did an event, me, him, Dan, Micah, Gemma was there, our editor and stuff. So that was quite good. Caroline was there. But yeah, got to meet Chris. So I didn't realize that you and him came in on the same year.
We did. And I think Rob Green, RWW Green, he came in months before us. So like I don't know if he was open. I can't remember if he was open submission or he just had an agent and got selected. But Rob and I were on my first podcast. Like his book had just come out and mine was coming out later. So somehow we got put together on my first podcast and he got interviewed. So that's how I met Rob and Chris and Dan and all that crew. And they're just some great people. I've learned a lot from them and they're really good friends.
They're really good people. Yeah, they're good. So we've talked a little bit about it. Tell people who don't know, and me as well, about The Rush's Edge. What's it about? Where did it come from? How did it develop? I mean, the worst question I think you can ask a writer is, where do you get your ideas? But specific novels have to come from somewhere, and you can later point at what inspired them. So, what inspired it, and tell us about the story of The Rush's Edge.
Okay, well, it might be better if I tell you about the story of The Rush's Edge and then what inspired it. It's a story about in my galaxy. It's not our galaxy. It's not our area, but it's just somewhere completely different. In a galaxy a long time ago.
Far away.
Far away. There's this of course evil government called the Coalition, and they create soldiers in the lab to fight their wars for them, and they're called VATS. They're Vanguard Assault Troops, and they create them, and they're implanted with technology and trained and programmed until they're ready for battle, and then they fight the wars, and then after so many years they're released from service, and so they just kind of wander around on the edges of the galaxy. And so it's about one of these guys named Hal and his former commanding officer Ty. They kind of like team up after they get out of the military and do some salvaging out in the edges of known space. And there was a big war fought out there between these AIs and the Coalition, and so they salvage alien technology and kind of do it for different private firms. And they get a natural born techer, like a new techer on their ship, and Hal's kind of interested in her. And once they get out on a job, they find this strange sphere that downloads something into their ship, downloads a presence into their ship, and the Coalition does not like that and wants to do anything they can to get whatever that is. And so I don't want to give away too much of the plot, but it's basically they're on the run during that part of it. But it kind of came out of thinking about my dad. My dad was a Vietnam veteran, and he veterans struggle with a lot of things like PTSD and what to do once they get out of the military, like there's not those close bonds that they have with those they serve with. And I kind of saw that firsthand with my dad. So I kind of wrote it because of that and thinking about that. And I did a lot of research into you know, soldiers and how they cope when they get out of the military, and you know what they struggle with. And so there's some of that. And trying to think, uh and basically, I mean, the other thing that inspired it was actually teaching. I got to thinking when I created the vats, I thought, well, there has to be, you know, something about them, like what are they going to be like? And
Hmm.
I teach a lot of kids that are ADHD, and you know, I got to thinking about how, you know, we always think of that as a negative, but it could be a positive too. And so I kind of came up with the rush. And so vats have this ability to rush. And what that means is they go into this heightened state of awareness, and they're stronger and faster and, you know, quicker thinking than natural born soldiers are. And so it kind of, you know, my teaching and knowing, you know, certain kids that I really love, you know, they're great kids. And you know, I thought, well, how can I, you know, how can I put what I've learned from teaching and put that in the book? And so when you read the book, Ty is a lot like me as a teacher. Kind of, you know, I put a lot of myself into that. And I don't know, it was funny because when I started writing the book, I planned on Ty to be the main character. And I started writing, and Hal just stood up and took over. He was like, "This story is about me," you know. And I'm kind of, I was a pantser at that time, but now I'm kind of in between a plotter and a pantser.
Hmm.
Like I have evolved. Dan Hanks is trying to get me to be more of a plotter. But yeah, when we talk and he's like, "Oh, you gotta plot it out," you know. So I'm much more of a plotter than I used to be. But yeah, Hal stood up and took over the story, and he's like, "This is my story," you know. And I was like, "Okay, I'll have to go with that," and you know, which was kind of fun. You know, he's probably my favorite character so far. So,
I think
um,
something that we had spoken about in the past actually was the fact that there's a link between your book and The Coward, in that the main character in that suffers from PTSD. And there again, I also did the same as you. I did some research and I'd met someone who'd suffered from it, and that drove part of the reason to have that kind of character and that kind of story, and to do it well, and to try and do it as best as I can, given that I haven't been in the military.
right.
That's the thing of someone sort of saying, you know, have you served? I'm like, no, but I've spoken to people who have, and then that's helped me kind of craft that story. Did you speak to your dad at
That
all
happened.
about this?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say that happened to me as well. I got someone sent me a message on, said, you know, where did you serve at? And I'm like, I did not, you know. And they said, you really captured that you know, closeness between people who serve in the military, and you know how your you know your fellow soldier has your back, and like how important that is, and
Mm.
what that's like when that's gone. And I was really touched at that. I'm so glad that I was able to, you know, portray that, you know, in a way that connected with someone who was actually in combat. So
Yeah, I felt the same when someone said that. I said, you know, I'm honored that you think I have, but you know, I have not. I have not served. I just hopefully did my homework well, and it seems to have been fairly effective if you believe that I did serve. So
right,
that's good.
it was the highest compliment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. I definitely think so. Um, so let's talk about music, because I always write with tip 99% of the time I write with music on in the background. It gets me in the right headspace. If I
Hmm.
need to write an action scene, I can put something fast on. If I'm writing something else, I use it almost like white noise.
Hmm.
And I only ever write with soundtracks. But you've got sort of a playlist and other things up on your website about the Rush's Edge, and but they've got lyrics. Like some of the songs have lyrics. How does it?
Oh,
So, how important is music in your process there?
it, you know, I don't listen to as much music when I'm actually writing
Mm,
as I do as I'm planning, you know. And
right.
I have a 30-minute drive to work every day. So
Yeah.
you know, I would pick songs that seem to exemplify the characters, and I'd have that playlist on while I'm driving to work, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this next. So, you know, things will pop in my head. And so I guess I do a lot of my writing work to music, but when I actually sit down at the keyboard, sometimes lyrics do get in the way
Mm,
sometimes.
hmm.
But certain songs that like really, really exemplify, certain characters for me. And Paul Samel, I did a interview with him, and he was like, "Okay, so let's talk about Rush because I know that band must have influenced you, And I was like, "Yeah, I listen to a lot of Rush, yeah." But there's so many I listen to so many different like time periods and genres. So,
Mhm.
um, but I think, it's more the planning and the idea stage that gets me in the mood than it is me actually listening to the songs while I'm writing, because sometimes the lyrics do get in the way. And,
Yeah.
um, I'm trying to think if I've listened to any soundtracks that I really loved. I mean, I actually found listening to I don't know if you've ever heard of like people listening to like red noise or pink noise or white noise. There's like there's like this thing on Pandora. It's pink noise, and pink noise kind of sometimes sounds like waves coming in.
Right.
And so I would put that on a lot when I'll be writing. And it's
Mm.
just kind of a repetitive, but like white noise kind of to drown everything out. And,
Yeah.
I've got a great pair of headphones like you have. And, I put those on and just block everything out. But yeah, music is really important. Like there's each character always has a song. And one of my friends, the sweetest thing she did, she's a children's author. But she made a playlist for my book from the songs that she felt exemplified the book. And that was the
Interesting.
highest compliment too. I was like, oh my God, it's just so like that songs had come to her when she read the book. And
Hmm.
and some of them were the same, but maybe by a different artist. Like Seven Nation Army, I think, is one. She had it by a different artist, but the same song, and that's definitely a house song. But yeah, so I definitely, music is really important. I have, I think for every book I've written so far, I've had a playlist for, except maybe the little thing I'm noodling around with right now. I don't, but I'm working on it.
Hmm. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it works. Music works as a good for putting you in a certain mood and putting you in a certain headspace. And like anything else, music has become part of my writing routine. I can't write in other places. I've tried it and I just don't find it comfortable. I sit at the same desk in the same place, same headphones, and so having
Yeah.
music as part of that is just gets me in the right space. So that when I sit down, my brain, like everything else, it's a muscle. It's like, okay, now we know what we're doing, and music gets me
Mhm.
there. So I don't sort of stumble. I find it
Right.
helpful.
It's definitely essential. I have to have that to do the planning that I do when I drive back and forth, to work. And it's like 30 minutes there and 30 minutes in the afternoon. And once
Mm.
I get done listening to the afternoon and I get in, I'm like ready to go, And so, I go right into writing when I get home from work. And, I pretty much, it's my second job. I work it like a job. I mean, you have to,
Hmm.
I don't feel right if there's a day I don't get on my computer and write, something's wrong. Like, yeah. And I have a friend, he's an artist, and a couple years back, I guess about 5 years, every day. And I got to thinking, and that's kind of another thing that inspired the Rush's Edge. I thought, well, if he can draw and paint every day and create an artwork every day, I can write every day,
Hmm.
like why can't I do that? So I did that for like a straight year. And and since then pretty much it's become like a habit. Like if I'm not sitting there with my laptop, I don't know what.
Yeah,
I,
it doesn't have to be thousands of words every day. It's just a little bit,
right.
and it all adds up. And as long as you feel like you're making some progress, and um, yeah, I took 2 weeks off over Christmas to have a complete break and didn't write, and that was a struggle over the holidays. I'm like, and I'm supposed to be resting, so I'm supposed to not write. I'm just sat like
I did the same thing.
that. But I was ticking things over, and ideas were coming to me that I hadn't had because I was so busy in the process, and I hadn't had that in a while. So that break helped in a way for lots of other reasons. But I suddenly started
Right.
thinking, "Oh, what if?" And I wasn't also in the background thinking, "I've got to work on this chapter and then that thing," and then I had the headspace suddenly to just kind of come up with new things. And now I've scribbled them all down again. But
Right. Those notebooks, you have to have a notebook I have one everywhere. So I come up with an idea, I'm scribbling it down or putting it in my phone, or
yes.
yeah. There's notes in my phone. I know if I passed away and people went through them, they'd be like, what in the world? Like, what is this about? Like, it's just I'll think of a sentence and I'll just type it in. It's just disjointed, like, phrases and ideas. And I don't know. Once I write it down, I remember it. But if I get an idea and I don't write it down, I will forget that idea and kick myself. Like, I cannot. I have to write it down or I'll forget. And of course, there's that old thing, the old adage about, like, writers, you try to go to sleep and you get 10 new ideas that you've got to get up and write, like, before you go to sleep. Like, why do all the ideas come at that moment? Like, I'm trying to shut down and they just start coming. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, I guess your brain's like filtering out and sorting everything during the day, and then it starts to wind down, and it's got the room suddenly think, oh, but what about this and what about that? Like, no, I'm trying to go to sleep. Shush.
Like, stop it. Yeah, for sure.
So tell me about role playing, because I'm also a role player. I play D&D. I've got 2 games ongoing at the moment. I'm actually not a GM in either of them, which is rare for me. But tell me about D&D and then how it feeds into your writing process, because that was quite an interesting thing too.
Oh yeah. Well, let's see. I've been a role player, I guess, ever since high school. I met my husband. We're kind of, I guess I was in high school and I was about to graduate and he was in college. He had just started college, so we're close to the same age. But he had been playing D&D a lot longer than me. But I had got my first DM's manual when I was probably like 13, and I didn't have anybody. There was a couple kids at school that kind of did it, but they weren't cool with girls in the group. Um, but then I got into like a really great group. We did D&D. I think it was in the middle, like, what is it, 3.0, 3.5,
Must be
somewhere
something
in
like
there.
that. Yeah.
We did some classic, but I've done like basic. We've done like advanced AD&D, the old one. But I had a really great group for a while, and we did some Vampire, the Masquerade, and we did some Call of Cthulhu, and that was a lot of fun. And just so I guess that's always been kind of a big part of my life since I've been about 18. And I ran a couple of vampire games on my own, and I'm trying to think. I've never run a D&D game, but I've played in like tons of them. And like Gamma World, if there's any old gamers out there, they probably know what Gamma World is. It's it's way back. Because I don't even think they made it when I started playing it. Like, everybody I knew had it, so they, we all kind of jumped in. But role playing's been really important. It helped me, when you build a game, it like kind of helped me with world building in a way, because if somebody had said, okay, you've got to create a whole universe and all these planets and this whole setup of your world for the Rush's Edge, I probably never would have gotten started. Like, but you start with that one thing. You start with one scene, and then you go outwards and you build on that. And I guess it's been really important to me that way. And also, when you write action, when you're a GM, you've got to have a mix of letting your players develop their characters, but you've also got to have action and move the story along at the same time. So for me, writing was a lot like that. Trying to kind of have a balance between those two things. And so I think I wrote a blog post about role playing, ROLL playing, like people who like to roll dice and have the action going on, and then role playing, like building your character, ROLE playing, and my husband's definitely a role player. Like, he likes to roll the dice, and I'm more of a role player. Like, I like the characters. So, just playing with all sorts of people, in different D&D groups kind of helped me get the balance between that. And I think that helps. It helps you tell a story in a way to like engage an audience, because the last thing you want is your game to go flat, you know, for all your characters. So you have to think on your toes, and you know, I don't know, thing for me. Like when I was thinking about putting out the book and how to, you know, set things up, you know, it was kind of a natural thing that came to mind, you know.
I liked that, yeah, because I read that article that you'd done, and I liked it because you're saying you have to get the balance right between building enough of the world that people feel invested in it, but also um, the action that drives things forward, but you also want the characters to develop too. Because when you're,
Right.
it's slightly different that when you're playing with individuals who are actually there giving you immediate feedback, that's a lot scarier. You're thinking on your toes, as you said, versus when it's in a book, you know, you don't have to do it, but equally you're imagining people reading the book and thinking, oh, this is a bit boring. And you're like, you know, so we want to make sure that it's constantly moving and that the pace is good enough that you get enough action, enough character development, enough world building that is still an engine that's driving everything forward. So I
Right,
like
right.
that between the two different types of role play and role play.
Right, right. There's definitely a, you know, you just have to, you have to hit that balance just right. And you know, every time like if I'm writing something and I'm bored with it, when I'm writing it, I'm like, nobody's going to want to read this.
Mm.
This is not the right scene to go forward, you know, and I'll scrap that and start somewhere else. And I don't know if you've ever had that happen. Like you're writing and you're like, I don't really, I hate this part, you know, like take it out, you know, like make the action, you know, drive it. So it's really easy. It's easier for me, I think, once I thought about that connection to try to keep the action moving forward. And you know, there were a couple of, you know, for a short time I read reviews, like a really short time, then I learned my lesson.
Yeah.
But one of the reviews said there's so much going, you know, there's a lot of action in here, but then a lot of people love that, you know. So I don't know, you know, at first I thought, well, maybe I messed up, but then I'm like, no, I think it has the right amount of action. I think it keeps you invested, you know, in the whole. I don't know. I just I don't know. But anyway, that's reviews. Don't read them. If you're an
No,
author, don't read them. Don't
no,
read them. Don't
you
do
can't. They're not
it.
for you,
Yeah.
and you can't please everybody, and it's never going to be, you know, one
You'll
person will
go.
say they love that thing and the other person will say they hate that thing, so you can't learn anything from them.
Right. You know
Just
what? This is kind of a crazy story, but when I was reading reviews before I learned my lesson, I ran into one review that said the Rush's Edge was an oddly had an oddly chaste romance in it. And then I turned right around and the very next review I got said it was a bodice ripper. And it's not either one. I mean, so if you're planning on reading it, it's not either one. It's really not. Like I've asked people, I said, "Do you think it's that?" They're like, "No, no, no." You know. So I'm like, "Well, it can't be both. So
no.
it's really neither." but that's the craziness of trying to read reviews and like, I mean, how can it be this like I don't know, you know, it's not for me. It's not for me to read them. I can't figure it out. You know, I'm just going to write the story that I think people would like to read, that I would like to read,
Mhm.
you know, because I really write for myself first. And then, you know, I mean, I always have the reader in mind, but you know, you tell the story to yourself first, you know.
Yes.
I think, you know, it's really comes down to that. So yeah.
Because for the longest time, nobody else sees your material. It could be a year, 2 years, and the only person you're entertaining is yourself.
Right,
And
right.
if you're bored, right? My theory is like you is if it's boring to write, it's boring to read. Therefore,
Yes,
stop it and change it. Like some people have said,
yes.
I wish my books were a lot longer. And I'm like, yeah, I get bored. If I'm bored, then it's just going to slow it all down. And so I'm never
Yeah,
going to write 700-800 page books. It's just not. There are other authors that do it behind me and they do it incredibly well. And I love their books. But for me personally, I'm not thinking, oh, I should do that. I'm thinking, I can't do that, and I don't want to do that because that's not my style. Um,
right. Yeah, it's a lot about figuring out your own style for real. Like when you start to write, I don't know, I learned myself, like my way of writing and like how I develop a story and you know, it's like you I don't know, I'm trying to think of how to put it into words. Like when I first started writing, I hadn't really paid attention to my process,
Hmm.
like when I started writing the story. But as I did, I thought, oh, I see how that works, and like the second book was a lot easier because I understood what I need to move through to get a book finished, and I don't know, it's a lot about learning what works for you, and everybody's different,
Yeah.
I think like the worst a piece of writing advice I got was someone said, don't start a sentence with the word the. And I was like,
Why?
what's wrong with that? Like, and they were like, don't do that, don't do that. And I started looking, and I looked in 1984, and I think that one starts with the word the, or it. No, it was it. There was like something like, don't start with that. Like,
Mm,
and I'm like, how can you? That doesn't work for me. Like, okay, if that's your rule, then go with it. It's good for you. It works for you. But as being a writer, I would tell other writers, don't listen to advice like that. Like, don't use this word, don't use these types of adverbs or whatever. I mean,
yeah.
it's different for everybody.
Yeah. I follow the advice of people like Stephen King when he says, don't use a $5 word when a 25-cent word will work just as well. And people will know what it is, and they don't need to go and look up the $5 word. I'm very much of that mentality. I'm like, yeah,
Right,
this is how it is. People understand it. I don't want them to go away and learn what the word is. I want them to enjoy the story. Therefore, I don't want them to
right,
stumble on the $5 word. So let's get moving. And that's what I'm all
right.
about.
Like, you'll kick them out of the story if they run into a word like that. They're like, what? And you don't want them stopping the book to go look up a word,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
or whatever. But I know today we just click it on Kindle and it'll come up. But um, still though, that takes you out of the story. So yeah, yeah, it's it's all what works for you, like personal preference and what you find that works for you. And same thing could be said for reviews, that it's what worked for that person or didn't work for that person, and
This is the problem. Everyone's got their own lens, and you can't possibly
yeah,
accommodate everybody's. So you write the story for yourself and hope other people enjoy it. And
right.
that's kind of it.
And
I don't
that's
know.
that's the beauty of it. And if you like it, great. If you don't, I hope you find a book that you like, like go out and find. I want you to read, because I'm an English teacher, so I want you to read anything. Like, read what you love. Like,
Yes.
life's too short to read a bad book unless you just have to for class. But like, when I pick books for my classes, I'm like, what will be interesting? What can connect? Like, I try not to pull the boring ones out.
Yeah, yeah. I
But if
got
you're an
turned
English
off.
major, you wade through a lot of stuff,
Yeah,
that
I got
people.
turned off a lot of books in
Yeah.
school because I found them so dull. It's what the teacher loved me. Like, we got to read another one of these. Oh God, I'm so bored of this. But I
Right.
know people who don't read as adults for fun, for entertainment, for pleasure, because they were so put off reading in school. So,
Yes.
like years ago, I was at a job, and at lunchtime, I read a book. What I do every day, I'd sit, have my sandwich, and I read my book. My boss came by and like, she says, "Oh, what are you reading?" I showed her, and she's like, "Oh, okay." Then a week later, she came back and she saw me again. And she said, "Well, what are you reading now?" And I showed her a different book, and she went, "Another book?" She couldn't get the idea of reading for pleasure because it wasn't anything that was in her
Right.
wheelhouse. She just like, "Why are you reading again? Are you trying to learn something?" I'm like, "No, it's fiction. I'm reading fiction. I enjoy this." She was like,
Right.
"What? What's that?" It just, I think school years are very informative, but they can be very damaging if you have to read the wrong things.
They really can be. I mean, today, I know in education there's a real big push to find things that will connect with students from different backgrounds and different, just different cultures, different, you just have to find something that will connect with them. And then you can throw in a Shakespeare. Once you get them hooked, then you can throw in something, that maybe they need to read. Like, I say that some books are fun, and then some are like vitamins for your brain. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you might not like love to take them, but they're good for you to read. And
Yes.
if you hook them with the good one first, then you might be able to maybe, try to show them the beauty of something that they might not normally pick up. But yeah.
So Rush's Edge came out, and then you
Mhm.
worked on a sequel, Rush's Echo, which has just come out. What can you tell us about this one without spoiling too much about it or the first book?
Oh, okay. So, let's see. Basically, in the spiral where my story takes place, there's like the spiral and the edge, and so the edge is like the edge of kind of known space where everything's settled. People have settled.
Mm-hmm.
And in the spiral, the coalition has realized that all the vats that they release after 7 years of service they all go to the edge because the natural borns don't want to deal with vats. Vats have, they have a thirst for excitement, which leads them into violent encounters or bad choices. There are a lot of vats that end up, addicted to drugs or, doing illegal things for the rush. They got to have that excitement. And so they kind of push the vats to the edges of the galaxy, and they're not really wanted in the, more settled planets of the spiral. And so in the Rush's Echo, all these vats that have been going to the edge are kind of like drawn together along with a planet or two that want to oppose the coalition, because the coalition has decided it wants to reach out and take over the planets of the edge and like bring them into the coalition, because the edge is kind of like the Wild West. There's people out there, they kind of do their own thing. This planet might do its thing, this planet might do its thing. And so slowly the opposition, they're called the opposition kind of coalesces together, made up of vats and natural borns that want to resist coalition rule. And our heroes get caught up in that. They get caught up in that movement to push the coalition out of the edge and keep them out, and like have the edge be a separate entity from the coalition. And our heroes get kind of drawn into that. And in the middle of it, there's like a vat operative who's sent in to kind of infiltrate the upper levels of the opposition's ranks. And our heroes find out about a device that is going to be used to kill vats. Like it sets off the technology that they have inside of them and kills them. And so our crew goes in to try to stop that. And that then somebody gets left behind, and you have to see how it all turns out.
Right,
But it's a great ending. I think it really brings Hal and the rest of the Low Shod, that's the name of their ship, the Low Shod's crew, to a good ending, a good place. I really felt really good about the end of it, and I think it's exciting. I got a review the other day, a good one. I don't only read and it said the last 100 pages they couldn't put down, so I was like, oh, I did my job. Yeah, I kept you reading. But I hope it'll be as exciting as the first. So it seems like the reviews are saying that. So the good ones. I haven't really had a lot of bad ones yet, but I'm not focused on that. I'm only focused on like the blurbs and the preliminary stuff. But I hope everybody enjoys it, and I want you to have as much fun as I had writing it. When I was a little kid, I love Star Wars. It came out when I was young, and we played so many games of Star Wars out in the yard. And, so I want you to have as much fun reading the Rush's Edge and the Rush's Echo as I had, playing Star Wars in the yard, like watching the movies for the first time. Like, it really goes back to that early love of Star Wars, which I went to see with my dad. But just want you to root for the good guys, and worry that they might not make it. It's just fun sci-fi. I mean, is it it's not hard sci-fi, it's space opera, and space opera is so much fun. I'm not trying to, I don't think I don't know if I could. Hard sci-fi is great. I love to read it. It's fabulous. But for me, it's the space opera that has my heart, and I love that. I love that, good guys against bad guys, cliffhanger type things, but I will say the Rush's Edge doesn't, like, it doesn't leave it hanging too much, but you do
Right.
want to know more. And I think the Russia's Echo will complete that story in a great way that people will be happy with, I hope. And yeah.
Well, great. That sounds like
So,
a good conclusion to the story, and a great place to leave that. I'm going to leave links down below where people can find your website and links to both books. If they're
oh, thank
interested,
you.
they can pick them up, of course, there. Well, thank you for joining me tonight and for telling me all about your origin and your books. And you're working on something new, and hopefully there'll be some news about that in the future.
Yeah, I've got kind of a horror novel coming, and so we'll see. I'm shopping, shopping around and
Hmm.
seeing what will come out of that. So I've got every hope that you guys will see something new from me in the future.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll say good night, everyone. Good
Good
night.
night. Thank you for having me.